The iron gate of Nightshade estate closed with a sound like a coffin lid, the echo swallowing the last trace of her father's carriage wheels. Isla Vance stood alone in the entrance hall, her fingers twisted in the coarse fabric of her wedding dress. A hastily altered morning gown dyed a faded cream. At 18, she had become what the village washerwomen whispered about in pitying tones. "Sold her own daughter," Mrs. Henwick had muttered at the market, not bothering to lower her voice, "to that crippled duke rotting away in his tomb of a house. Bartholomew Grimm," another woman had added, crossing herself. 72 if he's a day. They say he's already buried 3 wives in that garden. The girl won't last the winter." Isla's throat had tightened then, but she'd kept her chin level, the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her. Her father shuffled beside her now. No, not now. He was gone. She was alone. Lady Agatha had dragged her niece to the altar. Silas Vance had simply sold his daughter and fled with gold still warm in his pocket. The ancient butler cleared his throat, his voice cracking like old parchment. "His Grace will receive you in the West Wing." The handful of witnesses, Nightshade's skeleton staff, their faces carved from stone and shadow, stepped back from the center of the hall. Through the dimness of the corridor beyond, Isla heard it. The rhythmic creak-drag of wheels approaching. The Duke of Nightshade was coming to claim what he'd purchased. My beautiful family, before we dive into this story, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from. The study smelled of old leather and older sins. Isla stood 3 paces behind her father, her hands clasped so tightly before her that her fingernails bit crescents into her palms. She had learned, in the 6 months since her mother's death, to make herself small, to breathe shallowly, to become a shadow that her father's creditors might overlook when they came pounding at the door. But there would be no overlooking today. "The terms are acceptable?" The voice that emerged from the high-backed chair facing the fireplace was not the death rattle she'd expected. It was low, measured, textured like velvet worn thin in places, almost gentle. Silas Vance's hand trembled as he smoothed the contract on the mahogany desk. "More than acceptable, Your Grace. More than I deserve. Considerably more than you deserve," the voice agreed, and Isla detected something sharp beneath the gentleness now. "But we are not here to negotiate your worth, Mr. Vance. We are here to discuss your daughter's future." Future. The word hung in the air, like a bitter joke. Isla had stopped dreaming of futures the night she'd found her father weeping in the kitchen, surrounded by ledgers marked in red, by notices stamped with the word "Final." She had stopped dreaming entirely when he'd told her, his voice thick with gin and shame, that he had found a solution, a buyer. "Isla." Her father's voice cracked on her name. "Come here, child." She moved forward on legs that felt carved from wood. The firelight painted everything in shades of amber and shadow, the heavy curtains, the towers of leather-bound books, the silver tray bearing a crystal decanter, and 2 glasses, one empty, one half full of something dark as blood, and beside the tray, a leather purse, its sides bulging with the weight of coin. The chair turned. Later, Isla would remember this moment in fragments, the screech of wood on stone, the intake of her father's breath, the way her own heart seemed to pause between beats. The Duke of Nightshade was not the monster she had conjured in sleepless nights. He was something worse. He was human, terribly, devastatingly human. His face was gaunt, the skin stretched paper-thin over elegant bones that might have been handsome half a century ago. His eyes, deeply set beneath silver brows, were the color of winter seas, grey and fathomless and unutterably weary. He wore black, unrelieved black, from his high collar to the gloves that covered his hands, even indoors, even before a fire. And those gloved hands rested on the arms of a chair fitted with wheels. "Miss Vance," he did not smile, did not offer pleasantries. "Your father has explained your circumstances. I wish to hear them from you." Silas made a strangled sound. "Your Grace, surely there's no need to. I am purchasing a bride, Mr. Vance, not a horse." The Duke's gaze never left Isla's face. "She will speak for herself, or this conversation ends now." The silence stretched. Isla felt her father's desperation radiating beside her like heat from a stove, felt the weight of the unpaid debts, the butcher who would no longer extend credit, the landlord who had promised eviction by month's end. She thought of her mother's grave, how her father hadn't been able to afford a headstone, how Isla had planted wild roses there instead, and how even those were dying now. "We are destitute," she said quietly. "My father owes more than he can pay in 3 lifetimes. The creditors will take everything, the house, the furniture, the clothes from our backs. I have no prospects, no dowry, no education fit for employment. In 3 weeks, we will be on the street." She met those winter-grey eyes steadily. "You already know this, Your Grace. You would not be here if you did not." Something flickered in the Duke's expression, not quite approval, but perhaps acknowledgement. "And if I offer you an alternative, marriage to a crippled recluse 40 years your senior, isolation in an estate that society calls cursed, a wedding bed that may well become a deathbed before the year is out?" His voice remained even, clinical. "Would you accept these terms?" "I accept that I have no terms to negotiate," Isla answered. "Only a choice between certain ruin and uncertain mercy." "There will be no mercy in Nightshade," the Duke said softly. "Only what you make of it yourself." He reached for something on the desk, a smaller purse, this one of black silk. "Your father and I have agreed to a bride price of £200, enough to clear his debts and provide modest security. The ceremony will take place in 3 days, at the chapel on my estate. You may bring nothing from this house except what you can carry in one trunk." He paused. "Do you understand what you are agreeing to, Miss Vance?" "I understand that I am being sold," Isla said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I understand that my value has been calculated in pounds sterling. I understand that 3 days hence I will no longer be my own." The Duke extended his hand, skeletal beneath the black leather, the fingers long and precise. "Then let us seal this transaction." Isla looked at her father. He would not meet her eyes. His gaze was fixed on the bulging purse on the desk, on salvation purchased with his daughter's life. She saw him for what he was then, perhaps for the first time. Not a villain, but a weak man drowning in his own failures, grasping at the only lifeline thrown to him. She placed her hand in the Duke's. His grip was cool through the glove, gentle despite the prominent bones. He held her hand for precisely 3 seconds, as if measuring its weight, its worth. Then he released her and reached for the coin purse. The sound of it hitting the table before her father was the sound of a door slamming shut. Final, irrevocable. 3 days, Mr. Vance, the Duke said. "Do not be late to your daughter's wedding." Her father's hands closed around the purse like a prayer answered. He did not look at Isla as he fled. She stood alone before the man who had bought her and waited for her new life to begin. The wedding had been a brief, bloodless affair. No guests, no music. Only the estate's ancient chaplain mumbling through the ceremony in a chapel that smelled of mildew and extinguished candles. The ring the Duke slid onto Isla's finger was too large. She had to curl her hand into a fist to keep it from sliding off. He had not kissed her, had not even touched her beyond the necessary clasp of hands during the vows. Now she stood in what the housekeeper, a grim woman named Mrs. Guard, had called the Duchess's chambers, though the title sat on Isla's shoulders like a coat made for someone else. Someone older, someone dead. The room was vast and cold, despite the fire struggling in the grate. The 4-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains a deep burgundy that looked black in the candlelight. The wallpaper had once been cream, patterned with roses, but time had yellowed it to the color of old teeth. Everything was clean. Mrs. Garda ran the household with martial efficiency, but clean could not disguise the weight of years, the sense that this room had witnessed things best left unremembered. Isla had dismissed the housekeeper an hour ago, unable to bear the woman's pitying silence as she'd laid out a nightgown, white, virginal, obscene in its implications. She had not put it on. Instead, she stood fully dressed beside the window, watching the moon rise over the wild gardens, trying to calculate how many hours until dawn, until she could pretend this night had passed uneventfully. The sound came softly at first, that rhythmic creak drag she had heard in the entrance hall 3 days ago, approaching, growing louder. Isla's breath caught. Her hands found the window frame, gripping it as if she might climb out, flee across the grounds in her wedding dress, run until what? Until the creditors found her? Until winter came and she froze in some ditch? She had made her choice. She had placed her hand in his and accepted the coin that bought her. The creaking stopped outside her door. She turned, her spine pressed against the cold glass, and waited. The knock was quiet, almost apologetic. "You may enter," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded in the cavernous room. The door opened slowly, pushed by a gloved hand. The Duke maneuvered his chair through with practiced efficiency, then closed the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to seal them together in the flickering candlelight. He had not changed from his wedding clothes, the same unrelieved black, the same high collar. But he had removed his jacket, and in shirt sleeves he looked even more fragile, the fabric hanging loose over shoulders that had once been broader. He positioned his chair near the fire, not approaching her, maintaining a careful distance. "You did not change," he observed. "Neither did you," Isla replied, then bit her tongue. Was that insolence? Would he punish her for it? But the Duke only inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. "I suppose we are both reluctant to play our assigned roles this evening." The silence stretched. Isla could hear the fire popping, the wind testing the windows, the ancient house settling around them like a dying creature finding a more comfortable position. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I will not touch you," the Duke said finally. His voice was quiet, matter of fact. "Not tonight, not ever, if that is your preference." Isla blinked. I don't understand. I did not purchase you for the reasons you imagine, Miss Vance. Mrs. Grimm, I should say." He steepled his fingers before him, the firelight catching on the black leather. "Though I confess the truth is scarcely more palatable." "Then why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why buy a bride at all if you don't intend to?" She could not finish the sentence. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that seemed to come from someplace deeper than mere physical exhaustion. "Because I am dying, Mrs. Grimm. Not quickly. I have perhaps a year, if fortune favors me. And I find I do not wish to die alone, surrounded only by servants paid to mourn me and relatives waiting to inherit." He turned his chair slightly to face her. "I needed someone who would be present, not out of duty or greed, but out of necessity. Someone who had as much to gain from my survival as I do." "I don't understand," Isla repeated, though her mind was racing. "How do I benefit from your survival? Once you die, won't your estate pass to your heirs? Won't I be cast out?" An intelligent question, something that might have been approval, crossed his gaunt features. Under normal circumstances, yes, a widow's portion would be granted, but the bulk of the estate would pass to my nephew, Cornelius. A gambling man, like your father. A man who would see this house gutted and sold within a year to pay his debts. He paused. "But circumstances are not normal. I intend to rewrite my will, leaving the entirety of Nightshade to you. It will take time. The legalities are complex, and my current heirs will challenge every word. But it can be done." Isla's legs suddenly felt unsteady. She groped for the window seat behind her and sat down hard. "You would leave everything to a stranger? To a girl you've known for 3 days? I would leave everything to someone who has no reason to wish me dead. Someone who, in fact, benefits more from keeping me alive as long as possible." The Duke's winter-grey eyes met hers. "You are the only thing in this house that isn't for sale, Mrs. Grimm. Not to my heirs, not to my creditors, not to anyone. You are the only person whose interests align with my own." He turned his chair toward the door, preparing to leave. "Wait." Isla rose from the window seat. "If this is true, if you truly mean to leave me, Nightshade, why tell me now? Why not keep me ignorant, compliant?" The Duke paused, his hand on the wheel of his chair. "Because I am buying your cooperation, not your affection. Because I need you to understand that your best chance of survival lies in keeping me alive. And because—" He hesitated, and for the first time, she heard something raw beneath his measured tone. "Because I am tired of lies. This house has been built on them, and I would have at least one honest thing in it before I die." He wheeled himself to the door, opened it, and paused on the threshold. "Sleep well, Mrs. Grimm. Tomorrow we begin the work of keeping me alive." Then he was gone, the sound of his wheels fading down the corridor, leaving Isla alone in the Duchess's chambers with a ring too large for her finger and a future she could not begin to comprehend. Isla learned the rhythms of Nightshade in the week that followed her wedding. The house woke with Mrs. Garde's footsteps at dawn, the housekeeper's keys jangling like shackles as she moved through the corridors, opening curtains and stoking fires. Breakfast was served at 8 in the small dining room, never the grand hall, which the Duke said was kept closed to save on heating costs. Tea at 4, supper at 7, taken in silence or near silence, the Duke occasionally offering observations about the estate's accounts or the weather. Isla responding with careful monosyllables. She existed in a strange limbo, not quite wife, not quite servant, not quite guest. The staff treated her with cautious deference, uncertain of her authority. The Duke treated her with distant courtesy, as one might treat a business partner whose company one neither sought nor avoided. And every evening at 9 o'clock, Mrs. Garde brought the Duke his medicine. Isla first witnessed the ritual on her third night at Nightshade. She had been in the library, already her favorite room in the house, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and leather chairs worn soft with use, when Mrs. Garde entered carrying a silver tray. Upon it sat a small crystal glass filled with liquid, the color of amber, and beside it, a single biscuit. The Duke had been reading, his chair positioned near the lamp. He set down his book with a sigh that suggested this was a familiar interruption. "Already 9?" he asked. "Punctuality is next to godliness, Your Grace," Mrs. Garde replied, her tone allowing no argument. She set the tray on the table beside him. "Dr. Whitmore insists on regularity." "Dr. Whitmore insists on many things." But the Duke reached for the glass with a resigned air, raised it briefly as if in a bitter toast to no one, and drank it down in 3 swift swallows. His face contorted slightly. The taste was clearly unpleasant, before settling back into its usual gaunt composure. Mrs. Garde waited, watching him with the intensity of a jailer ensuring a prisoner had swallowed his dose. Only when the glass was empty did she nod, collect the tray, and withdraw. "Tonic," the Duke said, noticing Isla's gaze. "For the heart, or so I am told." He picked up his book again, but Isla noticed his hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. They had been steady before. She said nothing. It was not her place to comment on her husband's health. This man, who was a stranger, bound to her by law and necessity. But she noticed. The next evening, she positioned herself in the library before 9, pretending to read a volume on estate management that might as well have been written in Greek for all she comprehended. When Mrs. Garde entered with the tray, Isla watched more carefully. The Duke's hands were steady as he set down his book, steady as he reached for the glass. He drank, grimaced, set the glass down, and within moments, a fine tremor began in his fingers. She watched him try to pick up his book again, saw the pages flutter like moth wings before he gave up and set it aside. "Are you well, Your Grace?" she asked quietly. "Well enough." His voice was tight. "The medicine has side effects. They pass." But the trembling did not pass, not for another hour. Isla sat with her unread book and watched from beneath her lashes as the Duke gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white beneath the black gloves, waiting for his own body to obey him again. On the 5th night, she arrived at the library early and waited. When Mrs. Garde brought the tray, Isla rose from her chair. "Mrs. Garde," a moment. She tried to sound authoritative, the way she imagined a duchess might sound. "What precisely is in His Grace's tonic?" The housekeeper's expression could have frozen wine. "Dr. Whitmore's prescription, my lady. I could not say what specifics. I am no apothecary." "Who prepares it?" "The doctor's own pharmacy sends a fresh bottle each week." "Mrs. Garde's tone suggested this line of questioning was both inappropriate and unwelcome. "His Grace's nephew, Mr. Cornelius, ensures it is delivered promptly. Most attentive of him." Something cold settled in Isla's stomach at the mention of Cornelius, the gambling man who stood to inherit if the Duke died before changing his will. "I see," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Garde." The housekeeper departed with a stiff nod. The Duke regarded Isla with something that might have been curiosity. "Developing an interest in pharmaceutical matters, Mrs. Grimm. Developing an interest in cause and effect, Your Grace." She moved closer to his chair, close enough to see the grey pallor beneath his skin, the way his jaw was clenched against the tremors beginning in his hands. "You are steady until you drink that tonic. Within minutes, you can barely hold a book. That seems to me a medicine working in reverse." The doctor assures me the tremors are a sign the tonic is working, that my heart is adjusting. But there was doubt in his voice, carefully buried. Isla stared at the empty glass on the tray. Mrs. Garde had not yet returned to collect it. A few amber drops remained in the bottom, gleaming like poisoned honey in the lamplight. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the glass. "Mrs. Grimm?" "I hardly think." But she had already lifted it, tilted it, touched her tongue to the rim where the dregs pooled. The taste hit her like a slap. Bitter, yes, as medicine should be. But beneath the bitterness, something else. Something metallic and wrong, like licking a handful of old pennies. Like the taste of blood, but colder. It coated her tongue, her throat, and her mouth suddenly flooded with saliva as her body tried to reject it. She set the glass down with a sharp click, her hand shaking now. "Mrs. Grimm?" The Duke's voice sharpened with concern. "What is it?" Isla looked at him, this skeletal man in his wheeled chair, this stranger who had bought her to keep himself alive. She thought of Cornelius ensuring the medicine was delivered promptly, of Mrs. Garde's insistence on punctuality, on regularity, of a nephew waiting for an inheritance. "Your Grace," she said slowly, her tongue still burning with that metallic taste, "I think you need to stop drinking your medicine." "That's absurd, Dr. Whitmore." "Who recommended Dr. Whitmore?" The Duke fell silent. His grey eyes met hers, and she saw the moment understanding dawned, terrible and complete. "Cornelius," he whispered. "Cornelius recommended him after my previous physician retired." The fire crackled in the grate. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 9:30. Somewhere in the house, Mrs. Garde was likely preparing tomorrow's dose, measuring out another day's worth of slow death. "They're poisoning you," Isla said, and the words hung in the air like an accusation, like a confession, like a declaration of war. "Your own family is poisoning you, and they've been doing it for months." The Duke's hands gripped the arms of his chair, trembling now not from toxin but from rage, from betrayal, from the bitter confirmation of what perhaps he had suspected all along. "Then we stop," he said quietly, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "Tonight, we stop. And Mrs. Grimm," he looked at her with something new in his winter-grey eyes, something almost like respect, "we begin to fight back." The morning after, Isla poured the tonic into the withered ferns by the window, watching the liquid disappear into soil that would likely never support life again. The Duke did not appear for breakfast. Mrs. Garde delivered the news with her usual stoicism. "His Grace is indisposed. He will take his meals in his chambers today." But when Isla climbed the stairs to the Duke's wing, ignoring the housekeeper's tight-lipped disapproval, she found him not abed, but dressed and seated by his window, staring out at the overgrown gardens with an expression of profound weariness. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "It is not proper." "Nothing about this arrangement is proper, Your Grace." Isla closed the door behind her. "How do you feel?" "Like I have been poisoned for 6 months and have only just stopped." He turned his chair to face her, and she saw what the morning light revealed. He looked worse, not better. His skin had taken on a greyish cast, and there were dark crescents beneath his eyes. "Withdrawal, I suspect. My body has become accustomed to whatever they have been feeding me. Should we send for a proper doctor? Someone not recommended by Cornelius? And tell him what? That I suspect my family of poisoning me, but have no evidence save the word of an 18-year-old girl, and my own paranoia." The Duke's laugh was bitter. "No, Mrs. Grimm, we are alone in this, which means we must move quickly." He gestured to a stack of leather-bound volumes on the table beside him. Ledgers, Isla realized, their spines stamped with years. 1842, 1843, 1844. Decades of Nightshade's history recorded in fading ink. "If I am to die," the Duke said, "and I suspect I am, poison or no poison, my body has been too damaged to recover fully, then you must be ready to take my place. The will can be contested. Cornelius will argue you manipulated a dying man, that you are unfit to manage an estate of this size. Your only defense will be knowledge. You must know Nightshade better than he does, better than anyone." "I know nothing of running an estate," Isla whispered. "Then we begin your education today." And so they did. The library became their kingdom, their fortress, their classroom. Each morning, Isla would find the Duke already there, positioned at the great oak table, that dominated the room's center. Before him would be spread the documents of the day's lesson: tenant rolls, harvest records, maintenance accounts, legal precedents. He would wait until she settled in the chair beside him, never across, always beside, so she could see what he saw, and then he would begin. His voice, already weakened by whatever poison had been leaching into his system for months, would grow hoarse by midday. So Isla learned to read the ledgers herself, her finger tracing lines of expenditure and income, while the Duke corrected her interpretation, explained the context, revealed the patterns that separated a loyal steward from an embezzler, an honest tradesman from a cheat. "Here," he would say, tapping a page with one gloved finger, "you see how the blacksmith's charges increased by 30% in 1843, and here, in the same year, the steward notes an unusual number of broken hinges, damaged gates, tools requiring replacement." His winter-grey eyes would fix on her face. "What does this tell you?" Isla learned to think before answering, to see beyond the numbers to the story they told. That someone was deliberately breaking things, creating work, splitting the profits with the blacksmith. Precisely. The steward was dismissed that autumn. Never accuse without evidence, Mrs. Grimm, but always, always watch the patterns. As November surrendered to December, Isla watched another pattern emerge. The Duke was failing. Not dramatically, not in the sudden collapse she had feared, but in increments so small that only someone who sat beside him daily would notice. The way he would pause mid-sentence, searching for a word that had always come easily, the tremor in his hands, different now from the poison-induced shaking, steadier but permanent. The afternoons when he would simply stop speaking and lean back in his chair, his eyes closed, gathering strength to continue. She became his hands when his own refused to cooperate, penning the letters he dictated to tenants and solicitors. She became his legs, climbing ladders to retrieve volumes from the highest shelves while he directed her from below. She became his memory when the fog descended, gently reminding him that they had already discussed the drainage project in the East Field, that the contract with the coal merchant had been settled last week. "Read it back to me," he would say after she had written some instruction or observation, and she would read in her clear voice what his hand could no longer steady itself to write. Sometimes he would nod, satisfied. Sometimes he would close his eyes and whisper, "Again, I want to hear it again." She understood, after a time, that he was not checking her accuracy. He was listening to his own thoughts, given voice by someone who would outlive him, making them real, making them permanent. The winter deepened. The library fire burned constantly now, but still the Duke wore his black coat indoors, still his fingers remained gloved. Isla brought him tea that he barely touched, brought him the biscuits Mrs. Garde baked that he would nibble and set aside. Food seemed to have become irrelevant to him, something his body no longer quite remembered how to want, but his mind remained sharp, honed by urgency. "The tenant leases," he said one grey afternoon in January, snow falling silently beyond the windows. "I have kept them short-term, renewable annually. Do you know why?" Isla considered. They had been studying the tenant arrangements for weeks now. "Control," she said finally. "A tenant on a year-by-year lease cannot afford to anger his landlord. He will pay on time, maintain the property, cause no trouble." "Yes, and what is wrong with that approach?" She paused. This was his method, not simply to teach her what he had done, but to make her question it, improve it, make it her own. "It breeds resentment," she said slowly. "No security, no incentive to make real improvements if they might be evicted at year's end. They will do the minimum to survive, nothing more." The Duke smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his gaunt face into something almost warm. "You are ready," he said quietly. "Ready for what?" "To be better than I was." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, the black leather cool against her skin. "When I am gone, you must not simply preserve Nightshade as I kept it. You must make it something better, something worthy of the price you paid to inherit it." Isla's throat tightened. In the months since her wedding, this man had become something she had not anticipated. Not a husband, certainly. Not a father, her own had forfeited that right. But something else. A teacher, a co-conspirator. The only person in her life who had ever looked at her and seen not a burden or a commodity, but a mind worth sharpening, a potential worth cultivating. "I will," she promised. "I swear it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the gardens in white silence. Inside the library, surrounded by centuries of Nightshade's history, a dying duke and an 18-year-old girl bent once more over their ledgers, racing against time to build a fortress of knowledge that even death could not breach. The letter arrived on a Friday in late February, delivered by a rider whose horse was too fine for a common messenger. Mrs. Garde brought it to the library on her silver tray, her expression even more disapproving than usual. "From Mr. Cornelius Grimm," she announced, as if the name itself were distasteful. "He requests the honor of calling upon His Grace this Sunday, for tea. He brings his sister, Miss Prudence, and their cousin, Mr. Gerard Whitlock." The Duke took the letter with fingers that trembled only slightly now. He had been improving these past weeks, gaining back some of the strength the poison had stolen. But at the sight of his nephew's handwriting, his face went carefully blank. "How thoughtful," he said quietly, "to suddenly remember their familial affection after months of silence." Isla looked up from the estate map she had been studying. "They know you stopped taking the medicine." "Of course they know. Dr. Whitmore will have reported that I refused his latest shipment." The Duke set the letter aside, as if it might contaminate the ledgers spread before them. "They are coming to assess the damage, to see if I am dying quickly enough without their assistance. Then refuse them. You are the Duke. You can deny them entry. And confirm their suspicions that I am onto them? No." He turned his chair to face her fully. "We will receive them, with all the courtesy their station demands. And you, Mrs. Grimm, will be at my side." Sunday arrived cold and bright, the kind of crystalline winter day that made Nightshade's decay even more apparent. The gardens were skeletal beneath their blanket of melting snow. The east wing's shutters hung crooked on their hinges. The fountain in the courtyard had cracked sometime in the last hard freeze, and no one had bothered to repair it. Isla dressed with care in the one good gown the Duke had ordered made for her, deep green wool that made her skin look less pale, her dark hair less severe. She looked, she thought, studying herself in the spotted mirror, like someone playing dress-up in a dead woman's clothes, like a girl pretending to be a duchess. But when she descended to the drawing room where the Duke waited, positioned by the fire with a blanket over his legs and tea things arranged on the table before him, he nodded approval. "You look the part," he said. "Now you must play it. Remember, you are not the girl your father sold. You are the Duchess of Nightshade, and this is your house. Act accordingly." The vultures arrived at 3 o'clock precisely. Cornelius Grimm entered first, and Isla understood immediately why the Duke had called him a gambling man. He had the look of someone who had lived too well for too long, flesh gone soft around the jawline, a slight paunch straining against his waistcoat, fingers adorned with rings that caught the light like promises of wealth. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Uncle, how well you look. We had heard such troubling reports about your health." Behind him came Prudence, a sharp-featured woman of perhaps 40, whose morning dress seemed premature, or perhaps optimistic. And finally, Gerard Whitlock, younger than the others, with calculating eyes that swept the room, cataloguing its contents like an auctioneer pricing lots. "Family," the Duke said, not rising, could not rise. "How unexpected. May I present my wife, the Duchess of Nightshade?" The pause was infinitesimal but unmistakable. Isla saw Prudence's gaze rake over her, saw the dismissal in those cold eyes. "This girl? This child?" "Charmed," Cornelius said, executing a bow that managed to be both correct and mocking. "We had heard of the Duke's nuptials, of course, though the suddenness did cause some concern among the family." "I am capable of making my own decisions, Cornelius," the Duke said mildly. "Last I checked, I required no permission from my heirs to conduct my personal affairs." "Heirs presumptive," Gerard corrected smoothly, settling into a chair without invitation. "Nothing is certain in this world, is it, cousin?" Mrs. Garde entered with fresh tea, her face impassive as she poured. Isla accepted her cup and sipped it slowly, watching the visitors over the rim. They perched in their seats like carrion birds, eyes bright with anticipation, making polite conversation that fooled no one. "You do look better, Uncle," Prudence observed. "Dr. Whitmore mentioned you had discontinued his treatments. Most unwise, surely." I found his treatments were hastening my decline rather than preventing it, the Duke replied. I have decided to let nature take its course without assistance. Assistance, Cornelius repeated, and something flickered behind his jovial mask. What a curious choice of words. The conversation continued in this vein for another quarter hour, polite words concealing sharp edges, concern that felt like threat. Isla sat silent, as she had been instructed, watching, learning, until Gerard made his mistake. The estate must be a terrible burden for you, uncle, he said, gesturing vaguely at the room's faded elegance. All these crumbling buildings, the upkeep costs. Perhaps it would be wise to begin making arrangements. Transfer some of the management responsibilities to those of us who are younger, more able. His gaze slid to Isla with barely concealed contempt. Certainly your bride cannot be expected to understand the complexities of Nightshade. Something cold and bright crystallized in Isla's chest. She set down her teacup with a sharp click. The East Tenant cottages require re-roofing, she said clearly. Cost estimated at £43, to be completed before autumn. The drainage project in the lower fields is running over budget by 12% due to unexpected bedrock, but will increase yields by an estimated 20% within 2 years, making it a sound investment. The miller's lease is up for renewal in May. He will ask for reduction in rent citing the poor harvest, but his books show he is selling grain on the side at Ashford Market. We will offer renewal at current rates or advertise the position. The silence that followed was profound. Gerard's mouth had fallen slightly open. Prudence's teacup had frozen halfway to her lips. Even Cornelius's practiced smile had slipped. The 1843 blacksmith embezzlement scheme, Isla continued, warming to her subject, netted approximately £200 over 18 months before the steward was dismissed. I have implemented new auditing procedures to prevent similar theft. Would you like me to review them with you, Mr. Whitlock, since you are so concerned with estate management? The Duke made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been laughter quickly suppressed. My wife, he said into the stunned silence, has proven remarkably adept at understanding Nightshade's complexities. In fact, I have found her grasp of the estate's affairs superior to my own in several respects. Youth, it seems, has advantages beyond mere vigor. Cornelius had recovered his composure, but his eyes had gone flat and cold. How industrious of her! One might almost think she is preparing to manage Nightshade alone. One might, the Duke agreed pleasantly. After all, widowhood is always a possibility when one marries a man of my years. It would be irresponsible not to prepare. Widowhood comes with certain limitations, uncle. Prudence set down her cup with deliberate care. The law protects estates from inappropriate bequests, particularly when made under questionable circumstances. Are you questioning my mental competence, Prudence? The Duke's voice remained mild, but ice ran beneath it. Because I assure you, Doctor, Whitmore's treatments may have weakened my body, but my mind remains quite sound, as does my right to dispose of my property as I see fit. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The visitors exchanged glances, quick, furtive, calculating. We simply wish to ensure, Cornelius said carefully, that you are not being influenced, that any decisions you make are truly your own. Isla felt the Duke's hand settle on her wrist, where it rested on the arm of her chair, a light touch, but deliberate. A statement. Mrs. Grimm, he said, has influenced me to stop drinking poison. For that alone, I am profoundly in her debt. What she may inherit from me, she will have earned through loyalty and intelligence, qualities I note have been in short supply among my blood relations these past months. The smile had completely vanished from Cornelius's face now. He rose, his movements sharp. I see we have overstayed our welcome. Come, Prudence, Gerard. Family is always welcome at Nightshade, the Duke said, though perhaps next time send word before coming. My wife and I keep quite busy with estate matters. They departed in a rustle of affronted dignity and barely suppressed fury. Through the drawing-room window, Isla watched their fine carriage pull away, churning mud from the drive. They will fight, she said quietly. They will fight with everything they have. Yes, the Duke agreed. He looked exhausted, the confrontation having drained what little color he had, but there was satisfaction in his voice. Let them. They have just learned that you are not some ignorant girl to be bullied or dismissed. That is a victory worth savoring. Isla turned from the window to find him watching her with something like pride in his winter-grey eyes. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "Fierce, my little lioness." And for the first time since her wedding day, Isla smiled. Spring came tentatively to Nightshade, as if uncertain of its welcome. The snowdrops pushed through the half-frozen earth in the south garden, and the ancient apple trees in the orchard began to show the first blush of buds. Isla had taken to walking the grounds each morning, mentally cataloguing what needed attention, so much needed attention, and planning the improvements she would make when the estate was truly hers, if it became truly hers, if the Duke lived long enough to finalize the will, if his body could hold out against the damage already done. The Duke had rallied somewhat since stopping the poison, but Isla had learned to read the signs that others might miss. The way he tired more easily as the days lengthened. The afternoons when he would sit in the library, staring at the same page for an hour, not reading, just resting his eyes on familiar words. The nights when she would hear the wheels of his chair in the corridor at odd hours, 2 in the morning, 4, and know that sleep had eluded him again. It was on one of those sleepless nights in early April that she found him in the ballroom. She had been wandering the house herself, restless with anxiety over the solicitor's latest letter. Cornelius was mounting a formal challenge, claiming undue influence, demanding a physician examine the Duke's mental faculties. The legal battle was beginning, and it would be brutal. The ballroom was in the oldest wing of the house, a vast space that had been closed for years. Mrs. Garde kept it locked, claiming the floor was unsafe, the ceiling prone to leaking. But tonight the door stood ajar, and through it spilled the pale light of a single candelabra. Isla pushed the door open wider and found him there, his chair positioned in the center of the empty floor. The candelabra sat on the old pianoforte in the corner, its flames reflected in the dusty mirrors lining the walls, multiplying the Duke's solitary figure into a dozen ghostly duplicates. "Your Grace," her voice echoed in the cavernous space. "It's past midnight. You should be resting." "I was resting," he said without turning. "I have been resting for 6 months. Tonight I wanted to remember what it felt like to be in a room made for living, not dying." She crossed the floor slowly, her footsteps loud on the warped parquet. As she drew closer, she saw that his eyes were fixed on the far wall, where a portrait hung, faded now, but still discernible. A young man in evening dress, dark-haired and broad-shouldered, standing beside a pianoforte with his hand extended as if inviting someone to dance. "Is that you?" she asked softly. 40 years ago, before the accident that took my legs, before my wife died in childbirth, taking my son with her, before this house became a mausoleum." His voice was distant, remembering. "I used to host balls, Mrs. Grimm. Can you imagine? This room filled with light and music and laughter. I was considered quite an accomplished dancer." Isla looked at the empty ballroom, trying to populate it with ghosts of joy. It seemed impossible that this decaying space had ever held anything but sorrow. "I have never danced," she said. "My father could not afford dancing masters, and after my mother died, there were no assemblies, no parties, nothing like that." The Duke turned his chair to face her, and in the candlelight his expression was unreadable. "Never?" "Never." He was quiet for a long moment, his gloved hands resting on the arms of his chair. Then he extended one hand toward her, palm up, the gesture eerily similar to the young man in the portrait. "Then we shall remedy that deficiency in your education." "Your Grace, I don't—" "Can you hum, Mrs. Grimm?" The question was so unexpected that she laughed, a small, startled sound that echoed in the empty room. "I suppose so." "Then humor an old man. Come here." She approached slowly and placed her hand in his. His grip was gentle but firm, steadier than she expected. With his other hand, he gestured for her to move slightly to his left, positioning her as if they were about to begin a formal dance. "Now," he said, "hum something. Anything. A tune your mother sang, perhaps." Isla's throat tightened at the mention of her mother, but after a moment she began to hum, a simple melody, one of the folk songs her mother had sung while working in the kitchen. The notes trembled at first, self-conscious in the vast space, then grew stronger. The Duke closed his eyes and began to sway, just slightly, his shoulders moving to the rhythm. His hand held hers, and he lifted it gently, then lowered it, as if they were moving through the figures of a dance only he could see. "Follow me," he murmured. "Just your shoulders, your hand, You don't need feet to dance, Mrs. Grimm. You only need music and intention. She swayed with him, matching his movements, their joined hands rising and falling between them. It was absurd. An 18-year-old girl and a dying man in a wheelchair, dancing without moving, in an empty ballroom lit by stolen candles. But something in the moment transcended absurdity and became something else, something achingly beautiful. Isla continued to hum, her voice growing more confident, and the Duke's movements became more fluid, more certain. His eyes opened and met hers, and in them she saw not the winter-grey weariness she had grown accustomed to, but something warmer, something that might have been happiness, or the memory of happiness, or the ghost of what happiness had once felt like. "You are a natural," he said softly. "Look at you, a duchess dancing in her own ballroom." "We're not really dancing," she whispered, though she did not stop swaying. "Aren't we?" He turned his chair slightly, guiding her with their joined hands to follow, and they revolved slowly in the center of the floor, the mirrors reflecting their movement into infinity. "I have attended 100 balls, Mrs. Grimm, and I tell you truthfully, I have never had a partner more graceful." Tears pricked at Isla's eyes, sudden and unexpected, because she understood what he was giving her in this moment. Not a real dance, neither of them could have that, but the idea of a dance. The shape of joy, sketched in shadows and candlelight and a hummed melody, a memory being created that she could carry forward when he was gone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "No." His hand tightened on hers. "Thank you, for seeing not what I am, but what I was, what I might have been to you in another life, another time." They continued to sway, and Isla hummed through her tears, a different song now, one she did not even recognize, notes pulled from some deep place she had not known existed. The Duke's eyes never left her face, and she saw in them a terrible tenderness, the kind of affection that came not from passion but from something rarer, genuine care. "If I had been young," he said quietly, almost to himself, "if I had met you when I was the man in that portrait, I would have danced every dance with you. I would have scandalized society by monopolizing your card. I would have been insufferable. I would have liked that," Isla said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. The melody faded, and their swaying slowed, then stopped, but he did not release her hand. They stayed there in the center of the ballroom, the candles burning low, the night deepening around them. "In another life," the Duke said finally, "you would have been my daughter, or my niece, someone I could have protected without scandal, loved without complication. In this life, you are my wife, my student, my co-conspirator, and if the law sees fit to make you my heir, you will be my legacy. But tonight, just for tonight, you are my final dance partner, and that is enough." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles through his glove, formal, paternal, achingly chaste. "Go to bed, Mrs. Grimm. Tomorrow we have correspondence with the solicitors, and you will need your wits about you." Isla nodded, not trusting her voice. She squeezed his hand once, then released it and turned toward the door. "Isla." She stopped. He had never used her given name before. "You have given me something I thought I had lost forever," he said to her, retreating back. "The ability to feel something other than bitterness. Whatever happens, whatever Cornelius and his vultures do, they cannot take that from me. You have already won." She fled before the tears could fall completely, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors of Nightshade. Behind her, she heard the slow creak-drag of his chair as he wheeled himself back to his chambers, humming softly, her mother's melody, imperfectly remembered, carrying through the darkness like a prayer. The solicitor arrived on a Tuesday in late May, when the gardens were finally showing signs of the transformation Isla had begun. Mr. Pemberton was an ancient man himself, nearly as old as the Duke, with ink-stained fingers and eyes sharp as broken glass behind his spectacles. He had served the Grimm family for 40 years and had, he informed them with dry precision, seen 3 dukes come and go. "I do not make a habit of encouraging family discord," he said as Mrs. Garde set tea before him in the library. "But I also do not make a habit of watching thieves inherit what they have tried to murder for." The Duke, positioned across from him with the morning light harsh on his gaunt features, nodded slowly. "You believe me then, about the poisoning?" "I believe the timing of Dr. Whitmore's engagement, Cornelius's sudden attentiveness, and your remarkable improvement upon ceasing treatment speaks for itself." Pemberton opened his leather case and withdrew a sheaf of documents. "I have drafted the new will according to your instructions. It is, I must warn you, certain to be challenged. Cornelius will claim undue influence, mental incompetence, coercion. He has already retained Hartley and Sons, expensive barristers who specialize in estate disputes. Let him retain the king's own counsel," the Duke said quietly. "The will is sound, legally unassailable, provided we can prove your mental competence at the time of signing." Pemberton glanced at Isla, who sat silently in her usual chair beside the Duke. "That is where your education becomes crucial, Mrs. Grimm. You must be able to demonstrate that you are a capable manager, not a manipulative opportunist. That the Duke's decision to name you sole heir is rational, not the addled whim of a dying man." "She can demonstrate it," the Duke said. "Show him, Isla." Over the next hour, Isla walked Pemberton through the estate records, the improvements she had implemented, the cost savings, the tenant relations she had carefully cultivated. The solicitor listened without expression, occasionally making notes, asking sharp questions that she answered with growing confidence. When she finished, Pemberton sat back in his chair and regarded her with something that might have been respect. "You have taught her well, Your Grace." "She taught herself," the Duke replied. "I merely provided the materials and the motivation. Now, what must we do to make this will ironclad?" Pemberton laid out the requirements with clinical precision. The will must be witnessed by 3 independent parties who could attest to the Duke's lucidity. A physician, not doctor. Whitmore must examine him and provide written confirmation of his mental competence. The document must be signed, sealed, and filed with the court before any challenge could be mounted. "Time is of the essence," Pemberton concluded, his gaze steady on the Duke's face. "I do not mean to be indelicate, Your Grace, but you do not look well." "I am dying," the Duke said simply. "The poison damaged my heart, my organs. Stopping it saved my life in the short term, but cannot undo months of injury. I have weeks, perhaps. A month if fortune favors me." The words hung in the air like a death sentence formally pronounced. Isla's hands clenched in her lap, her nails biting into her palms. She had known, of course, had watched him grow weaker despite the cessation of poison, but hearing him say it so plainly made it real in a way it had not been before. "Then we begin immediately," Pemberton said, rising. "I will arrange for Dr. Morrison from London. He is beyond Cornelius's reach, and his testimony will carry weight. We will need the witnesses by week's end. And Your Grace," he paused at the door, "you must conserve your strength. The signing must be witnessed personally. You must be alert, articulate, and demonstrably sound of mind." After Pemberton departed, the Duke sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the stack of documents that would determine Isla's future. The new will, the supporting affidavits, the inventory of the estate that would pass to her, land, buildings, investments, debts, everything. "You should rest," Isla said quietly. "There is no time for rest." He pulled the documents toward him, reached for his pen. "These must be reviewed. Every word must be perfect. Cornelius will scrutinize every clause, every phrase, looking for weakness. Then we will review them tomorrow, when you are stronger." "I may not be stronger tomorrow." The pen trembled in his grip, and he set it down with a soft curse. "I may be weaker. Every day now is a gamble, Isla. Every hour." She moved to his side, placed her hand over his. "Then let me help. You read, I will write. We will work together, as we always have." And so they did. As the sun tracked across the sky and sank toward evening, they worked through the documents, page by page. The Duke's voice grew hoarse, then faded to a whisper, but he continued. Isla's hand cramped from writing, but she did not stop. Mrs. Garde brought supper that they barely touched, brought fresh candles when the light failed, brought worried glances that neither acknowledged. It was near midnight when Isla heard the first cough. A small thing, quickly suppressed. The Duke continued reading, his finger tracing the line of text. But then it came again, deeper, wrenching something loose in his chest. He turned his head away, his hand pressed to his mouth, and when he lowered it, Isla saw the dark stain on his glove. Blood. "Your Grace." "It is nothing," Continue with paragraph 7. You are coughing blood. This is not nothing. Isla. He turned to face her, and in the candlelight, his face was skull-like, the skin stretched too thin over bone. I am dying. This is not news. What matters is that I die having secured your future. Now please. Paragraph 7. Her vision blurred with tears, but she bent over the page and continued writing. His voice resumed, steady despite the wet rattle beneath it. Another cough. More blood, darker now, staining the handkerchief he pressed to his lips. The clock struck 1, struck 2. The house settled around them, silent except for the scratch of Isla's pen and the Duke's labored breathing. That is the last amendment, he said finally, as the first grey light of dawn crept through the windows. Now the witness list. Pemberton, suggested the vicar, the magistrate, and he stopped mid-sentence. His hand went to his chest, pressing against his ribs as if he could hold something inside that was trying to escape. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. I need a moment. Isla was at his side instantly, her hand on his shoulder. I am sending for Dr. Morrison. Now. Not yet. The will must be. The will is finished. We have done everything we can tonight. Please, Your Grace, please rest. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed to have aged another decade in the past hours. You promise? We have done enough? We have built a fortress, she whispered. On paper, in law, in every way that matters. They cannot breach it. You have given me everything I need to fight. He sagged in his chair, the last of his strength spent. Good, that is, good. She helped him back to his chambers as the sun rose, his weight heavy against her shoulder, the wheels of his chair dragging. Mrs. Garde met them in the corridor, her face pale with fear, but Isla shook her head. Not yet. Not the doctor yet. Let him rest, first. She settled him in his bed, the first time she had entered his private chambers, but propriety seemed meaningless now. He looked impossibly small against the dark coverlet, his breathing shallow and labored. The handkerchief clutched in his hand was soaked through with blood. Isla, he whispered, when Pemberton returns, the signing. You must make sure. I will make sure. I promise. Rest now. His eyes closed, and for a terrible moment she thought he had slipped away. But then his chest rose, fell, rose again, still breathing, still fighting. She sat beside his bed as the morning light strengthened, watching over him the way he had watched over her future through the long night. The documents lay in the library below, their ink still drying. A paper fortress, as she had said, built word by word against the darkness. All that remained was to sign them before the darkness won. Dr. Morrison arrived from London on Thursday, a stern-faced man with silver whiskers and a reputation for honesty that even Cornelius could not impugn. He examined the Duke for 2 hours, testing his memory, his reasoning, his comprehension of the documents he was about to sign. When he emerged from the Duke's chambers, he pronounced him frail in body but sound in mind, and put his professional seal on a document that would prove crucial in the battles to come. The witnesses arrived on Friday. The vicar, trembling with the gravity of the occasion, the magistrate, who had known the Duke for 30 years, and old Mr. Pemberton himself, who would serve as both solicitor and third witness. They assembled in the library at noon, the new will laid out on the great oak table like a battle standard. The Duke had rallied for this, gathering what remained of his strength. He was dressed in his finest black coat, his sparse hair combed back, his gloved hands resting on the arms of his chair with deliberate steadiness. Isla stood behind him, her own hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Pemberton read the relevant passages aloud, his voice formal and clear. I, Bartholomew Grimm, Duke of Nightshade, being of sound mind and body. A small ironic twist of the Duke's mouth at this. Do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, lands, holdings, and investments to my wife, Isla Grimm, Duchess of Nightshade, in recognition of her exceptional stewardship and devotion. The Duke reached for the pen. That was when the pounding began. The sound thundered through the house, fists on the front door, voices raised in demand. Mrs. Garde's footsteps hurried across the entrance hall, her voice raised in protest. Then other footsteps, heavy and numerous, forcing their way inside. You cannot enter without His Grace's permission. We have every right to enter this house. Stand aside, woman. Cornelius's voice, thick with fury and barely suppressed panic. The library door flew open. Cornelius stood on the threshold, Prudence behind him, and with them, a portly man in a physician's coat whom Isla did not recognize. Behind them, two large men who had the look of hired muscle, there to intimidate, to enforce. "Uncle!" Cornelius strode into the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled witnesses, the document on the table, his uncle's hand still reaching for the pen. "What travesty is this? A private legal proceeding," Pemberton said icily, rising from his chair. "To which you were not invited, Mr. Grimm." "Private? You call it private when this girl has clearly manipulated my uncle into disinheritance?" Cornelius gestured wildly at Isla. "She has isolated him, poisoned his mind against his own family." "I believe you are the expert on poisoning," the Duke said quietly, and the room fell silent. Cornelius's face went red, then white. "I will not stand here and be accused." "Then leave." The Duke's voice was soft but carried absolute authority. "You are not welcome in this house. I have brought Dr. Whitmore to examine you." Cornelius gestured to the portly man, who stepped forward with an oily smile. "To determine whether you are competent to make such decisions. Clearly you are not. The girl has addled your wits." "I was examined this morning by Dr. Morrison of Harley Street," the Duke interrupted. "His findings are a matter of record. I am of sound mind. Your Dr. Whitmore's services are not required." "Morrison can be fooled, bribed. Can I?" Dr. Morrison stepped forward from where he had been standing by the window. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Grimm. I suggest you retract it before I feel compelled to defend my professional reputation in court." Cornelius sputtered, his carefully planned ambush unraveling. Prudence laid a hand on his arm, her sharp eyes calculating. "Uncle, please, we are only concerned for your welfare. This girl is clearly unsuitable. She has no breeding, no education. She has more intelligence in her little finger than the lot of you combined," the Duke said, and for the first time since they had entered, he smiled, a thin, terrible expression. "She discovered your poison. Did you know that? Tasted it herself to confirm what I suspected. She saved my life while you were counting the days until my funeral." "Lies," Cornelius hissed. "The ravings of an addled mind. Do you know what arsenic tastes like, Cornelius?" The Duke's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. Metallic, bitter, like old pennies on the tongue. "Doctor, Whitmore's heart tonic was full of it. Enough to kill slowly, to make it look like natural decline. Very clever, almost worked." The room had gone deathly still. Even the hired men had stopped their menacing posture, suddenly uncertain. The vicar had gone pale as parchment. The magistrate's hand had moved to his coat pocket, where Isla knew he kept a small notebook for recording statements. "You cannot prove this," Prudence said, but her voice wavered. "I kept the bottles," Isla said quietly. "Every one that was delivered. They are in a locked cabinet in the pantry, labeled and dated. I am certain a chemist could confirm their contents." Cornelius lunged forward, his hand reaching for the documents on the table. "This will is invalid. I will contest it in every court. You will do nothing." The voice was different, stronger, and it came from above. The Duke was standing. Isla's heart stopped. He should not, could not. His legs had not borne weight in years. His body was too damaged, too weak. But his hands were locked on the arms of his chair, his legs trembling beneath him but holding, his back straight as the soldier he had once been. Every eye in the room fixed on him. Cornelius stepped backward, his face slack with shock. Prudence made a small, frightened sound. "You thought me helpless," the Duke said, his voice shaking but clear. "Thought me weak. Thought you could murder me by inches and claim what was mine as if you had earned it." He released one hand from the chair, held it out steady, perfectly steady, toward Isla. "This woman earned it. She kept me alive. She learned this estate. She became what none of you ever were, worthy." The hand trembled now, the effort too much. But Isla was there, moving swiftly to his side, letting him grip her shoulder for support. "I am Bartholomew Grimm," he continued, his voice resonating through the library. "Duke of Nightshade. I am of sound mind and body enough to stand before witnesses and declare my will. I disinherit you, Cornelius. You, Prudence. You, Gerard. Wherever you are skulking, Everything I have goes to Isla, every acre, every stone, every penny, and if you contest this, I have instructed Mr. Pemberton to pursue criminal charges for attempted murder." "You would not dare," Cornelius whispered. "I am dying anyway," the Duke said simply. "What have I to lose? But you have everything to lose. Your reputation, your freedom. Choose wisely." The silence stretched. Cornelius's face worked through a dozen emotions: rage, fear, calculation. Finally, he stepped back toward the door. "This is not over," he said. "Oh, but it is." The Duke's legs buckled, and Isla lowered him gently back into his chair. "You have lost. You simply have not accepted it yet. Now get out of my house." Cornelius fled. Prudence followed. Dr. Whitmore scurried after them like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. The hired men exchanged glances and left without a word. The door slammed. The house fell silent. The Duke sat gasping in his chair, his face grey, his entire body shaking from the effort of those few moments standing. But his eyes were bright with triumph. "Your Grace," Dr. Morrison said urgently, moving to his side. "You should not have." "I know." The Duke waved him away weakly. "But I needed them to see, needed them to understand that I chose this, that Isla earned this." He looked up at Pemberton. "The will. Now, before I lose consciousness." Pemberton placed the pen in his hand. The Duke's signature was shaky, the letters barely legible, but he completed it. The 3 witnesses signed below. Pemberton applied his seal, the hot wax dripping like blood onto the parchment. "It is done," he said quietly. "Legal and binding. Witnessed and sealed." The Duke slumped in his chair, the pen falling from his nerveless fingers. Isla caught it before it could roll to the floor. "Did we win?" he whispered. She knelt beside his chair, taking his cold hand in both of hers. "We won." "Good." His eyes closed. "Good." Dr. Morrison was already moving, calling for Mrs. Gardy, for blankets, for his medical bag. But Isla stayed kneeling, holding the hand of the man who had just given her the world, and watched as the cost of his final defiance settled over him like a shroud. The Duke did not wake on Saturday. Dr. Morrison moved into one of the guest chambers, maintaining a vigil that he said was medical necessity, but Isla knew was kindness. The Duke's breathing had become labored, wet-sounding, each breath a struggle won and lost. His eyes remained closed, his face peaceful in a way it had not been in months, as if, having secured Isla's future, he had finally given himself permission to let go. Isla sat beside his bed through the day and into the night, leaving only when Mrs. Guard physically removed her, insisting she eat something, rest for an hour. But she could not rest, could not eat, could only sit in the drawing room staring at nothing, waiting for the inevitable. Sunday dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect June morning that mocked the darkness within Nightshade's walls. Isla was dozing in the chair beside the Duke's bed when she heard it, a soft sound, almost like her name. Her eyes flew open. The Duke's were open too, grey as winter seas, focused on her face with an clarity that had been absent for days. "Isla," he whispered again. "I am here." She took his hand, careful of how fragile it felt, bird bones wrapped in paper skin. "I am here, Your Grace." "Not Your Grace." A faint smile. "Not anymore. Just Bartholomew. Just an old man who is very tired. Then rest. You have earned it." "Not yet." He tried to sit up, failed, his breath coming in short gasps. "Outside, please. I want to see the garden. One last time." "You should not be moved." "I am dying, Isla. What harm can it do?" His grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. "Please, I have lived too long in darkness. Let me die in the light." She found Dr. Morrison in the hallway, told him what the Duke wanted. The physician hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If it brings him comfort. He has hours at most, perhaps less." Together they moved him to his chair. He weighed almost nothing now, as if death had already claimed the substance of him and left only the shell. Isla wrapped him in blankets despite the warmth of the day, tucked them around his wasted frame. He bore it all with patient silence, conserving his strength for what was to come. She wheeled him through the quiet house, through the corridors he had traveled for decades, out through the French doors that opened onto the south garden. The garden she had been tending these past months, coaxing back to life from the wilderness it had become. The roses were blooming. She had not known they would be, had thought them too damaged, too long neglected, but somehow they had survived, and now they covered the old trellises in clouds of white and pink and deep crimson. Their scent filled the air, sweet and heavy, almost overwhelming. The Duke drew in a breath, deep, despite the pain it caused, and something in his expression softened. "I had forgotten," he whispered, "how beautiful it could be. My wife planted these, Elizabeth. She died in the spring, when they were just budding. I could not bear to look at them after. Let them run wild." "They remember her," Isla said softly. "Even after all these years, they bloom for her." She wheeled him along the gravel path to the stone bench beneath the largest rose arbor. The morning sun filtered through the flowers, dappling everything in pink-gold light. Somewhere a bird was singing. The fountain, which Isla had repaired last month, burbled softly. "Here," the Duke said. "Stop here." Isla set the chair's brake and moved to sit on the bench beside him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the garden wake around them. A bee droned past, heavy with pollen. The roses nodded in a breeze too gentle to feel. "I should apologize," the Duke said finally. "For what?" "For buying you, for treating you as a commodity, a solution to my problem." His breath rattled. "You deserved better than to be sold by your father and purchased by a dying man. You gave me a future," Isla said, her throat tight. "You gave me knowledge, purpose, security. You gave me more than anyone else in my life ever did. I gave you burdens, an estate in decline, a legal battle that will consume years, enemies who will never stop whispering that you manipulated a weak old man." He turned his head to look at her, and his eyes were wet. "I gave you everything I had, and it is both too much and not enough." "It is everything," she whispered. "It is the world." A tear tracked down his gaunt cheek, catching the light. "I wanted to do more, wanted time to see you settled, see you happy. Wanted to walk you down an aisle to a young man who deserved you, to hold grandchildren who would have your eyes and your fierce spirit." His voice broke. "I wanted to be your father, Isla, and I had only months when I needed years." She was crying now too, tears falling hot and fast. "You were more of a father to me in these months than mine ever was in 18 years. Then I die content." He reached for her hand, held it between both of his own. "Listen to me now. When I am gone, Cornelius will try again. He will challenge the will, spread poison about your character. Society will be cruel, but you are stronger than all of them. You know Nightshade. You know its people, its land, its heart. Trust that knowledge. Trust yourself." "I will. I promise." "And Isla," his grip tightened, "live. Not just survive, but live. Restore this house. Fill it with light and laughter and life. Find love if it comes to you. Have children. Make Nightshade what it was meant to be. A home, not a tomb. Promise me." "I promise." The words came out choked, broken. "Good." He released her hand and leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting closed. "Good." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher. The Duke's breathing grew shallower, more labored. Isla held his hand and waited, her tears falling onto the blanket covering his lap. "Isla," he whispered, so softly she almost missed it. "I am here. I did not buy a wife." Each word was an effort, pulled from some deep reserve of will. "I found a daughter. I found a reason to say goodbye." His hand went slack in hers. His chest rose once more, fell, and did not rise again. The birdsong continued. The roses nodded in their eternal dance. The fountain burbled on, indifferent to the passing of the man who had built it, for a wife who had died too young. Isla sat with him as the sun moved across the sky, holding his cooling hand, surrounded by the roses that remembered love and loss and the strange, terrible beauty of both. She did not weep anymore. Her tears had run dry. She simply sat, bearing witness to the end of a man who had saved her by purchasing her, who had loved her by teaching her, who had freed her by dying. When Dr. Morrison found them an hour later, he stood at a respectful distance, waiting. Finally, Isla rose. She bent and kissed the Duke's forehead, the first and last time she had done so. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me the tools to build a life worth living." Then she turned and walked back toward the house, her spine straight, her steps steady. Behind her, the roses bloomed on, and the wind carried their scent like a benediction through the gardens of Nightshade. The Duke of Nightshade was dead. The Duchess of Nightshade had just been born. Dear family, if your heart broke alongside mine in that garden, pause with me now. Let us honor the Duke with a moment of silence. A man who bought a life and gave it meaning, who found a daughter in his final season, who proved that love needs neither passion nor years, only truth. Rest now, Bartholomew. Your work is done. A moment of silence for the Duke before we continue with the rest of the story. Dearest family, if you are still watching, type "Rest in Peace Bartholomew" in the comments section to show the world that you care. The funeral was held on a Wednesday, in the small chapel where they had been married 4 months earlier. 4 months. It seemed impossible that her entire life had changed in the span of a single season, that she had gone from her father's discarded daughter to the Duchess of Nightshade, sole heir to an estate that sprawled across 3 counties. The chapel was full, not with mourners who had loved the Duke, but with the curious, the calculating, the concerned. Tenants who wondered what the new Duchess would mean for their livelihoods, solicitors who smelled years of profitable litigation, society matrons who had come to witness the spectacle of an 18-year-old girl inheriting a dukedom. And in the front row, dressed in black that looked like celebration, Cornelius, Prudence, and Gerard, their faces masks of grief that fooled no one. Isla sat alone in the family pew, her mourning dress severe and unadorned, her veil thick enough to hide the fact that her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears in the garden. Now there was only the cold, clear certainty of what must come next. The vicar spoke of the Duke's dignity, his service to the estate, his tragic decline. He did not mention the poison, the family who had tried to murder him, the young wife who had saved him just long enough to sign away their inheritance. Those truths would be for the courts to examine, not the church. They buried him beside Elizabeth in the rose garden, beneath a stone that Isla had commissioned. Simple, elegant, bearing only his name, his dates, and beneath them, words she had chosen with care. He taught me to live. I taught him to let go. Cornelius had objected, of course, said it was inappropriate, presumptuous. Isla had looked at him with the Duke's winter-grey eyes. She had learned that look in the library, during months of lessons, and told him his opinion was noted and dismissed. The stone had been installed that morning. After the service, the guests filtered back to Nightshade for the reading of the will, though everyone already knew its contents. Mr. Pemberton read it aloud in the drawing room, his voice carrying to every corner, ensuring there could be no claims of mishearing or misunderstanding. The entirety of the estate to Isla Grimm, Duchess of Nightshade. Cornelius stood, his face purple with rage. This is a farce. I am filing a formal challenge. That girl manipulated my uncle, isolated him from his family. The late Duke, Pemberton interrupted coldly, anticipated your objection. He left a sealed letter to be read in the event of such a challenge. Would you like me to read it now, Mr. Grimm, or shall we save it for the magistrate? The color drained from Cornelius's face. Whatever the Duke had written in that letter, and Isla did not know its contents, he had sealed it without showing her. It was damning enough to make his nephew reconsider. You have not won, Cornelius hissed at Isla as he stormed from the room. You are a child playing dress-up in a dead man's house. This estate will crush you. Prudence paused at the door, her expression almost pitying. He is right, you know. The debts alone will bankrupt you within a year. The tenants will not respect a girl barely out of the schoolroom. You should accept a settlement now, while we are still willing to be generous. Isla met her gaze steadily. Your generosity is noted and declined. Mrs. Garde, please show these people out. The housekeeper, who had been standing near the door with barely concealed satisfaction, stepped forward. With pleasure, Your Grace. The title struck Isla like a physical blow. Your Grace, not Mrs. Grimm, not the child bride. Your Grace. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like the Duke's hand, steadying her. When the house was finally empty of vultures and voyeurs, Isla climbed the stairs to the Duke's study. She had not entered it since his death, had let Mrs. Garde maintain it as a kind of shrine, but tonight she needed to be there, surrounded by his books, his papers, his presence. She sat in his chair, too large for her, making her feel like a child again. On the desk lay the ledgers they had studied together, his handwriting cramped and fading in the margins where he had made notes. Beside them, a letter addressed to her in his hand. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. My dear Isla, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are alone. Forgive me for that. Forgive me for leaving you to face what comes next, without me beside you. You will doubt yourself. You will look at this estate, these responsibilities, and wonder if you are equal to them. You will hear Cornelius's voice in your head, calling you a child, an imposter. You will be afraid. Be afraid. Fear is wisdom acknowledging risk. But do not let fear paralyze you. You know Nightshade now. You know its people, its land, its rhythms. You know which tenants are honest and which are thieves. You know where the money flows and where it pools. You know more than I did at twice your age, because you learned it with the desperate focus of someone who had everything to lose. Trust that knowledge. Trust the strength that let you taste poison to save a stranger. Trust the mercy that made you tend a dying man's garden when you could have abandoned him to his fate. And know this, I was proud to call you my wife, my student, my heir. But more than any of that, I was proud to call you my daughter in all but name. You were the last and best thing in my life, Isla. Do not mourn me over long. Live. With love and faith, Bartholomew. The tears came then, silent and hot, falling onto the paper and blurring his signature. She wept for the father she had found too late, for the future they would never share, for the loneliness that stretched before her like an endless corridor. But when the tears finally stopped, she rose, wiped her eyes, straightened her spine the way he had taught her. The balcony off the study overlooked the estate, the gardens, the tenant cottages in the distance, the fields rolling toward the horizon. Isla stepped out into the cool evening air and looked at her inheritance, her kingdom, her burden, her future. 18 years old, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond anything she had imagined in her father's cramped, desperate household, and utterly, devastatingly alone, but not unprepared, never unprepared. She thought of the Duke's lessons, his patience, his careful instruction in everything from tenant management to contract negotiation, thought of the midnight hours in the library, his voice growing hoarse as he pushed himself to teach her one more thing, prepare her for one more challenge, thought of his last words in the garden, I found a daughter. I found a reason to say goodbye. I will make you proud, she whispered to the wind, to the roses blooming below, to the grave that held the only person who had ever truly seen her. I will rule with the mercy you taught me. I will make Nightshade flourish. I will be worthy of what you gave me. The estate stretched before her in the gathering dusk, full of promise and peril, of opportunity and obligation. Somewhere in the tenant cottages, families were sitting down to supper. Somewhere in the fields, the crops were growing, needing care. Somewhere in the accounts, there were problems to solve, decisions to make, futures to secure, and she would face all of it, alone, but not unarmed, grieving, but not broken. The Duchess of Nightshade turned from the balcony and walked back into the study. There was work to be done, tenants to meet with tomorrow, contracts to review, a legal challenge to prepare for, an estate to save. She lit the lamp on the Duke's desk, her desk now, and pulled the first ledger toward her. Outside, night fell over Nightshade. Inside, a young duchess bent over her work, her shadow stretching long across the floor, and began the task of building a legacy worthy of the man who had bought her freedom with his fortune and taught her to rule with his dying breath. In the garden, the roses bloomed on, keeping their vigil over the graves of those who had loved and lost and found. In the end, a strange redemption in the shadow of death. And in the library of Nightshade, surrounded by books and ledgers and the lingering scent of old leather and older memories, Isla Grimm began her reign. My sweet family, the Duke gave Isla everything in 4 months, his knowledge, his estate, his last breath in a garden of roses. But Cornelius isn't finished. The creditors are circling, and Nightshade is bleeding money the Duke never told her about. You've been with Isla through the poison, the lessons, the devastating goodbye. You were there when he called her his daughter. And now please prove to me that these stories matter to you. Subscribe if you haven't. Like and share this video. Someone out there needs it. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions. With love, the Victorian Royal Stories team.